Chapter 3, Your Limitless Brain. You may be thinking, Jim, I see what you mean about technology. I wouldn't want to live without it, but I do feel more overloaded, distracted, and forgetful than ever. Here's the good news. You were born with the ultimate technology, the greatest superpower. Let's take a moment to acknowledge just how extraordinary your brain is. It generates up to 70,000 thoughts per day. It races with the speed of the fastest race car. Like your fingertips, it is uniquely yours. There aren't two brains in the universe exactly the same. It processes dramatically faster than any existing computer, and it has virtually infinite storage capacity. Even when damaged, it is capable of producing genius. And even if you only have half a brain, you can still be a fully functioning human being. And remarkable stories about it abound, like the one about the comatose patient who somehow developed a method of communication with his doctor, or the woman who could recall important events by date going back as far as when she was 12 years old, or the slacker who became a mathematical genius after suffering a concussion during a bar fight. None of this is science fiction or the product of a superhero comic. They're just examples of the extraordinary function built into that remarkable machine between your ears. We take so much of that function for granted. Let's think about just what the average person has accomplished simply by being an average person. By the age of 1, you learned how to walk. No simple task, considering how many complex neurological and physiological processes are required. A year or so after that, you learned how to communicate through the use of words and language. You learned dozens of new words and their meanings on a daily basis and kept doing so all the way through school. And while you were learning to communicate, you were also learning to reason, to calculate, to parse an endless number of complex concepts. And all of that was before you read a single page of a book or attended one class. Our brains are what separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. Think about it. We can't fly. We aren't particularly strong or fast. We can't climb with the dexterity of some animals. We can't breathe underwater. As far as most physical functions are concerned, we're just average. But because of the power of our brains, we are overwhelmingly Earth's most dominant species. By harnessing that incredible mental power, we have created ways to explore the ocean depths like a fish, move tons of weight like an elephant, and even fly like a bird. Yes, the brain is quite a gift. The brain is so complex that we know more about our vast universe than we do about its workings. We've learned more about it in the past decade than we've previously learned over the course of human history. And we'll learn even more about it from the time this book goes to press to the time it hits the bookshelves. Our understanding of the brain is ever evolving, and we know that what we've learned about it is only a tiny fraction of what there is to be learned. But what we already know is staggering. So let's take a journey through your limitless brain. The brain is part of the central nervous system, CNS. Similar to the control tower at an airport, your brain acts as its control center, directing all the coming and goings of information, processes, and impulses. The brain has 3 major areas: the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the cerebral cortex. Both the cerebellum and the cerebral cortex start with cere, Latin for wax, because of its waxy appearance. The brain is made of fat and water, weighs approximately 3 pounds, and facilitates incredible power and ability. The brain stem moderates the basic functions we need to live, such as breathing, maintaining a regular heart rate, impulses to eat or have sex, and our fight and flight responses. It is located at the top of your spine and the base of your skull, buried deep within the brain. At the back of the brain, the cerebellum is responsible for moderating movement and coordination. There's also increasing evidence that it plays a role in our decision-making. The cerebral cortex is the largest part of our brain, where the majority of our complex thinking, short-term memory, and sensory stimulation takes place. It is made up of the occipital, parietal, temporal, and frontal lobes. Our frontal lobes are where most of our thinking takes place, where logic and creativity derive. The brain is split into two halves. They are connected by the corpus callosum, which acts like a bundle of telephone wires between the lobes, sending messages back and forth. Right now, you have somewhere around 86 billion neurons, also called brain cells, firing and acting together in concert as you hear these words and assimilate this information. These neuronal signals are released in the brain and received by neurotransmitters, which then pass the message along to other neurotransmitters or stop the message altogether if that's the appropriate response. We used to think that we reached our neurological peak in late adolescence, after which our brains never changed, other than to deteriorate. We now know that this is far from the truth. Our brains have the capacity for neuroplasticity, which means that it can be changed and shaped by our actions and by our environments. Your brain is always changing and molding itself to your surroundings and to the demands you place on it. Because our brains are subject to the influence of our genes and environment, we each possess a brain that is entirely unique to us. They're like snowflakes, no two are alike. Each brain adapts to the needs of its owner. Let's look at someone raised in an environment that was full of stressors such as poverty, lack of access to food, or lack of safety. That person will have a very different brain structure than someone brought up in a very comfortable, affluent, well-cared-for setting. But before you jump to the conclusion that one environment is quote-unquote better than the other and breeds a better functioning brain, I challenge you to reconsider. As I stated earlier, the brain is capable of being molded and shaped, meaning that at any point, anyone can decide to change the way their brain functions. While it's easy to assume that the individual who grew up in a more stressful, unsupportive environment may not wind up reaching their full potential due to their brain's development under those conditions, growing evidence suggests those people are able to thrive and reach new levels of success due to the mindset they are forced to develop in such a situation. Based on the number of successful people who overcame troubled upbringings, it may be that a difficult childhood or challenging upbringing breeds resilience, among other attributes that can lead to success. Understanding neuroplasticity. What can we learn from the brains of London taxi drivers? This is the question neuroscientist Eleanor Maguire of University College London posed as she considered the vast amount of information held in the brains of the city's cab drivers, appropriately called the knowledge. To earn their licenses, applicants traveled by moped through a specific section of the city, a 10-kilometer radius of Charing Cross Station, for 3 to 4 years, memorizing the maze of 25,000 streets within, as well as thousands of attractions they supported. Even after this intense study, only about 50% of applicants pass the series of licensing exams. Perhaps, thought Maguire, those successful had larger than average hippocampi. Maguire and her colleagues discovered that London taxi drivers did indeed have more gray matter in their posterior hippocampi than people who were similar in age, education, and intelligence who did not drive taxis. In other words, taxi drivers had plumper memory centers than their peers. It seemed that the longer someone had been driving a taxi, the larger the hippocampus, as though the brain expanded to accommodate the cognitive demands of navigating London's streets. The London Taxi Cab Study provides a compelling example of the brain's neuroplasticity, or ability to reorganize and transform itself as it is exposed to learning and new experiences. Having to constantly learn new routes in the city forced the taxi cab driver's brains to create new neural pathways. These pathways changed the structure and size of the brain, an amazing example of the limitless brain at work. Neuroplasticity, also referred to as brain plasticity, means that every time you learn something new, your brain makes a new synaptic connection. And each time this happens, your brain physically changes. It upgrades its hardware to reflect a new level of the mind. Neuroplasticity is dependent on the ability of our neurons to grow and make connections with other neurons in other parts of the brain. It works by making new connections and strengthening or weakening, as the case may be, old ties. Our brain is malleable. We have the incredible ability to change its structure and organization over time by forming new neural pathways as we experience, learn something new, and adapt. Neuroplasticity helps explain how anything is possible. Researchers hold that all brains are flexible in that the complex webs of connected neurons can be rewired to form new connections. Sometimes that means brains compensate for something it has lost, as when one hemisphere learns to function for both. Just as there are people who have suffered strokes and have been able to rebuild and regain their brain functions, those that procrastinate, think excessive negative thoughts, or can't stop eating junk food may also rewire and change their behaviors and transform their lives. If learning is making new connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining those connections. When we struggle with a memory or experience memory impairment, we are likely experiencing a disconnection between neurons. In learning, when you fail to remember something, view it as a failure to make a connection between what you've learned and what you already know, and with how you will use it in life. For example, if you feel that something you've learned is valuable in the moment, but you'll never use it again, you are unlikely to create a strong memory of it. Similarly, if you learn something but have no higher reasoning as to why it's important to you or how it applies to your life or work, then it's likely that your brain will not retain the information. It's totally normal to have a memory lapse. We're human, not robots. But if we respond to this lapse in memory with the attitude that I have a bad memory or I'm not smart enough to remember this, then we negatively affect our ability to learn and grow. In other words, the belief we might develop in response to forgetting does far more damage than the lapse in memory. That kind of self-talk reinforces a limiting belief rather than acknowledging the mistake and reacquiring the information. What does that mean for learning? Plasticity means that you can mold and shape your brain to suit your desires. That something like your memory is trainable when you know how to help your brain receive, encode, process, and consolidate information. It means that with a few simple changes to something like your environment, your food, or your exercise, you can dramatically change the way your brain functions. I will share these mental energy tips in detail in Chapter 8. Here's the bottom line. Plasticity means that your learning and indeed your life is not fixed. You can be, do, have, and share anything when you optimize and rewire your brain. There are no limitations when you align and apply the right mindset, motivation, and methods. Your second brain. My students tell me after they learn about the vastness of their brain, they have a whole new sense of worth, that their self-esteem grows overnight. Here's more good news. You are not limited to just one brain. You have a second, your gut. Have you ever had a gut feeling? That moment when you just knew? If you've ever gone with your gut to make a decision or felt butterflies in your stomach, did you ever wonder why that was? Hidden in the walls of your digestive system, this brain in your gut is revolutionizing medicine's understanding of the links between digestion, mood, health, and even the way you think. Scientists call this little brain the enteric nervous system, ENS, and it's not so little. The ENS is two thin layers of more than 100 million nerve cells lining your gastrointestinal tract, from esophagus to rectum. Science is only beginning to understand the brain-gut axis and how it affects our brains, our moods, and our behavior. You may hear it referred to as the brain-gut connection. In the last decade, we've discovered that the gut has an outside effect on the way our brains function. One can liken it to the way a tree functions. The roots in the ground are drawing up vital nutrients and water from the soil, as well as communicating with the other plants. Those nutrients are then brought up into the body of the tree, fortifying and building the trunk and giving the tree what it needs to sprout new leaves each spring, which in turn gather light, another energy source. In the same way, the nutrients we take in are absorbed through our intestines. We rely on those nutrients to fuel our brains. While our brains take up very little of our total body weight, they use 20% of the energy we take in. So nutrients make a huge difference in the way our brains function on a day-to-day basis. The gut is lined with more than 100 million nerve cells, and it makes up part of the ENS. When a baby grows in the womb, the ENS and the CNS develop from the same tissue and remain connected via the vagus nerve. In many ways, the two systems mirror each other in structure. They also both use many of the same neurotransmitters to function, including serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine. As with CNS, we used to believe that we are each born with a certain amount of cells, and that's it. But like the brain, we now know that the ENS makes new neurons throughout adulthood and can be repaired when damaged. The gut is made up of these neurons as well as a network of bacteria that form the microbiome. And as with the brain, each of us has our own unique microbiome. What's more, these nerve cells operate through startlingly similar pathways as the brain. In 2010, neuroscientist Diego Bojorquez of Duke University discovered that the enteroendocrine cells of the gut had foot-like protrusions that resembled the synapses that neurons use to communicate. This caused Bojorquez to wonder if these cells could talk to the brain using signals similar to the way neurons do. He hypothesized that if this were happening, they would have to be using the vagus nerve, which connects the gut and the brainstem. After further testing, they discovered that the cells do in fact use the vagus nerve to take up messages and send them to the brain faster than could be done via the bloodstream. Team effort. The connection between the brain and the gut is still being explored, but it seems that they function in very similar ways and that they function in tandem. The little brain, in conjunction with the big one, partly determines our mental state. When you have a gut feeling that something isn't right, or conversely, that you should follow a hunch, it's not just superstition. Your gut has its own way of interpreting events and giving your brain signals. Furthermore, when you feed your gut with subpar food, you're also feeding your brain with subpar fuel. Right now, your gut is digesting the food you just ate and sending that fuel to your brain. If you were reading this, at the same time, a part of your brain is taking in the feel of the pages under your fingertips or your e-reader, if that's your preference, sensing the comfort of the chair supporting you and monitoring the environment around you to make sure you're safe. Another part of your brain is taking in the smells of your environment, maybe coffee or a fragrance in the air. Another part of your brain is absorbing the words that I'm saying in this book and turning them into meaning, which is then processed and stored in short-term memory, where it will then be sent to long-term memory under the right conditions, which we'll get to in a moment. All of this is to say that you have the ultimate superpower between your ears. You also have the ability to hone that superpower and make it greater, or to let it falter and decay. You get to decide what kind of environment your superpower lives in, one that supports your mission in life or one that distracts you from your greatest dreams. The elusive obvious. Given that we have this tremendous power of our minds available to us, why are we struggling? If your brain is indeed so magnificent, why are overload, distraction, forgetfulness, and feelings of inadequacy affecting us so much? How do we reconcile the fact that we have so much potential, but have days where we can't remember a simple name or think our way out of a paper bag? The answer is so simple. It's almost the elusive obvious. We were not taught how. Give a person an idea and you enrich their day. Teach a person how to learn and they can enrich their entire life. School is a great place to learn. There, we're taught what to learn, what to think, and what to remember. But there are few, if any, classes on how to learn, how to think, and how to remember. In his seminal book on education, Creative Schools, Sir Ken Robinson says, "One of my deepest concerns is that while education systems around the world are being reformed, many of these reforms are being driven by political and commercial interests that misunderstand how real people learn and how great schools actually work. As a result, they are damaging the prospects of countless young people. Sooner or later, for better or for worse, they will affect you or someone you know." My guess is that they have already affected you and everyone close to you. As you already know, my experience with the education system was a complicated one, and I acknowledge that my circumstances were unusual. In reality, though, even if I never had that fateful head trauma in kindergarten, I would probably have gotten much less out of my school education than was ideal. That's because very few schools anywhere in the world have incorporated learning how to learn into their curriculums. They'll fill us with information. They'll expose us to great works of literature and to figures who changed the course of history. They will test us, sometimes endlessly, to determine whether we can repeat back what they've taught us. But they won't get underneath all of this to teach us how to teach ourselves. to make enriching our mind, discovering new concepts, and truly absorbing what we learn fundamental to our everyday lives. This is not about placing blame on the teachers who work hard to teach our children. In my opinion, teachers are some of the most caring, compassionate, and capable human beings in our society. In fact, my mother became a teacher after my brain injury because I was struggling so much and she wanted to help me and others like me. The problem lies in the outdated system in which teachers work. If Rip Van Winkle woke up from decades of slumber, the only thing he would recognize today are our classrooms because they have evolved so little. Education hasn't changed enough to prepare us for the world we live in today. In an era of autonomously driven electric cars and vehicles capable of taking us to Mars, our education system is the equivalent of a horse and carriage. And then there's the matter of how we're earning our livings is changing profoundly and increasingly rapidly. Automation and artificial intelligence, AI, are affecting the future of work. And I'm not speaking only about factories where laborers are being replaced by robots. In addition, many of us are facing the need to switch from the structure of an office job to the volatility of the gig economy. The jobs that few of us might have imagined even 5 years ago have gained traction, while others are emerging this very moment that will affect the workplace in coming years. All of this points us in the same direction. We must take charge of our own learning. If schools tell us what to learn, but not how to learn, then we need to do the rest of the work ourselves. If digital overload threatens to hijack our brains, then we need to use what we know about learning to reset the ground rules. If the workplace is evolving with so much rapidity that we can never be sure of what work will mean to us tomorrow, then only by taking complete control of our learning can we truly be prepared for an unknowable future. Turn on the power. A quick, often told story. One day at a power plant, everything comes to an abrupt halt. All the machines go offline. The silence is deafening. The people running the plant are frantic, and after hours and hours, none of the workers can track down the problem. The head of operations is desperate at this point, so he calls the best local help he can find. The expert technician arrives and glances around the facility. He goes to one of the numerous beams, all with electrical boxes, opens one of them, and stares at the various screws and wires inside. He turns one screw, and like magic, everything starts working again, and the plant comes back to life. The head of operations is so relieved. He thanks the technician and asks him what he owes him. The technician says, $10,000. The head of operations is shocked. $10,000? You were here just for a few minutes. You turned one single screw. Anyone could have done that. I need an itemized bill, please. The technician reaches into his pocket, pulls out a notepad, scribbles a few seconds, and hands the other man the bill. The head of operations reads it and immediately pays him. The bill read, turning screw, $1. Knowing which screw to turn, $9,999. The lesson of the story, it's not that you have a screw loose. The story illustrates two things. The first is how much added value a limitless mind can offer you and others. We've entered an expert economy in which brain power trumps brute strength, where what you have between your ears is the greatest wealth-creating asset. There's those who know and those who don't know. And that applied knowledge is not just power, it's profit. Your ability to think, solve problems, make the right decisions, create, innovate, and imagine is how we add value. The faster you can learn, the faster you can earn. And that takes us to the second lesson. That one screw made all the difference. I've mentored and coached some amazing minds, and you don't have to be a genius to see genius leaves clues. One of those patterns is that elite mental performers filter and focus for those handful of screws that make all the difference and turn everything else on. This book is filled with many of the behaviors, tools, and strategies I've discovered to give you the maximum results and rewards for your effort. The world is throwing more challenges at you than ever before, and there's every indication that those challenges will continue to increase. At the same time, there is more to be gained from having a finely tuned brain than ever before, and you know now that you have more than enough potential to meet any challenge. But it's going to require taking control of your learning. It may seem as if it would take superhuman capabilities to keep up with the demands of our current reality, but you already have a hidden superpower, your brain. You may not be able to shoot webs from your hands, but you have something far better, the neural webs in your head. That superpower plant of a network between your ears is your greatest gift and greatest advantage. All we have to do is upgrade your brain the same way you upgrade your phone. How do you install new software into your brain? One of my favorite ways is what you're doing now. It's called reading.
What a wonderful window into this incredible brain that we have. That's amazing. And so surprising about the second brain, the gut.
Right.
And so you've talked about the brain and the gut, and I've often heard you sometimes mention like the heart.
We
So
do.
what role does the heart play in all this?
So it's interesting because the heart also has neurons. And so I always tell people that if they want to improve their self-esteem overnight, just study your body. Your body is this incredible genius and this incredible superpower. Your brain and your heart, they work together to produce emotions, right? Your heart actually contains neurons similar to those in your brain, and your heart and your brain are very closely connected, and they have this symbiotic relationship. Because your heart and your brain are so connected, your brain's autonomic nervous system signals your heart to pump its oxygen-rich blood, and your heart responds by delivering blood to your entire body, including your brain. Your brain is only about 2% of your body mass, but it requires 20% of its nutrients. When we're talking about the gut, that's why we do a whole section in this book on the best foods for your brain, and what you nourish flourishes. And so thinking about your brain like the roots, you're giving it the best foods ever, so it could be absorbed to go up to your brain. And so research, we've discovered more in the past 10 years than the previous 1,000 years. The heart is an information processing center. It could learn, it could remember. When people say they have heartache, when we're talking about emotions, I always tell people that information by itself is forgettable, but information combined with emotion becomes more of a long-term memory. The areas of our brains like the amygdala, the thalamus, the hypothalamus. So as your heart is processing different stimuli, it actually acts independently of our cranial brain and actually also connects and sends signals to the key areas of our brains, such as the hypothalamus, such as the amygdala, which helps to regulate our perceptions and our emotions. So we have amazing gifts built inside of us.
So the brain, the gut, the heart, they all have these ways of communicating with each other, and it's a bigger system than just independent pieces of our body. That's amazing.
Which is why, our foreword was written by Dr. Mark Hyman. And when we're talking about functional medicine, we don't treat any one area. We're not talking about just just brain when it comes to learning, left brain, right brain. We're talking about not just whole brain, but whole self learning. It's your left brain, your right brain, your three brains. It's your conscious, your unconscious genius. It's your gut. It's your heart. There's so many things that are involved here, and as complex as it is, it's more complex than the stars in the known universe, and that's what's so exciting. Every single year, we discover more about our capabilities. And what we're finding is we're grossly underestimating our own potential. And we've discovered so much. And these are very exciting times for sure.
Well, that's something that surprised me a lot about this chapter was, we talk about human potential. We talk about our potential. And I think I've always seen potential as being like, oh, there's like a little bit more room to go. But this chapter like opens it up to really how radically transformative our own internal processes could be. Like there's the brain and what it could do. And so I just want to ask you, I think so many of us didn't grow up in this model. We grew up in the model of, oh, an old dog can't learn new tricks. That's just the brain I've got. Really limiting beliefs about our own capacity. If you could give everyone who's listening to this book right now the most empowering possible belief about their brain, what would it be?
I'm glad you brought that up because in part 2, when we talk about limitless mindset, we are actually going to uncover and decode the 7 lies that we tell ourselves about our potential, about our brain. But not only that, I'm going to give you a 3-step formula to take a disempowering belief like genius is born as opposed to being made, or that we use only 10% of our brain, or some of these disempowering beliefs, and we're going to turn them into empowering beliefs because all behavior is belief driven.
So if you had to give us a little preview now, one belief to hold as we go forward and start learning from your book, what would it be?
I think the meta belief here is that there are no limits, that our intelligence is not fixed like our shoe size, that regardless of your age, your background, your career, your education level, your financial situation, your gender, your personal history, your IQ, your potential is not set. And that's the most exciting thing. When we're talking about neuroplasticity, your brain is the ultimate adaptation machine. And it responds just like your muscles do to stimulus. When you work it out, it gets stronger. And your brain is the same way. So you absolutely can teach a dog new tricks.
That's so exciting. And I know in this book, you're going to teach us a lot of, like what we're going to learn. But of course, so important, like you were teaching us before, how we learn. That's so exciting. And now I'm really excited because, of course, you are teaching us so much of what to learn too, but really importantly, teaching us how to learn. So let's get to that now.